disciplines see so. And here it is if grow and mainstream work to mainstream women's studies to the entire academic discipline. So thanks to this permission to hold this program for both the universities, and also I thank the international and national speakers who could make be available here in all the seven from Assam, and so USA, University of Buffalo, Oregon, Smith College, etc. Similarly from Singapore, an activist come, an interpreter in the court, professor will be joining. And we also have an entrepreneur from Zimbabwe and the people from faculty from Bahrain. So it is a combination. In this, that is what I said. It is quite inclusive. And similarly, the topics, though it is a very short-term, a 1 week program, we also cover a wide range of topics where we will have now in the immediately after the program, women employment as rights, where Professor Neeta will be focusing on. And you also have other range of topics like coping mechanism for women and child during pandemic, sustenance of women entrepreneurship in the COVID context, gender equality, the persisting scenario based on COVID-19 in Bahrain, because it is a global scenario. So we are also learning from other countries, systematic global gender inequality in COVID-19, the gendered impact of COVID-19 in US, and the politics of parenting during COVID-19. You being women studies persons would have experienced how gendered it is, the parenting. It is supposed to be divided equally, or at least whichever area it is possible, sharing should be there. But in the pandemic context, whether it is in the lockdown context, whether it is happening. So the politics of parenting will also be a kind of a topic of discussion. And you also have finally the empowering through gender sensitization. So the way forward. So this is what we are going to discuss, and all these. Can Velusamy please mute it? It is disturbing others. In this kind of situation, what is happening already? We have been experiencing and reading and getting reported from several quarters globally. Not just it is a global; it's a pandemic, so it's a global issue. So how we are going to overcome the kind of issues? What strategies to be adopted? As far as this program is concerned, of course. It is high time that we have to have gender sensitization taken forward to every spheres, because absence of gender sensitivity itself is contributing to the kind of issues that we are facing. And it is, when I say in gender, I'm more inclusive in a broad-based context, not just women and gender inequality alone. We have multiple inequalities in the society. So in the current context, there is a new normalcy. How many of them will be able to adapt to this new normalcy, though it is going to be temporary? And there are a lot of uncertainties and how people are going to really cope up, maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So how long it will go, how many households will cope without getting employment, without being paid. Even if you go to work, it is not being paid proper, half wages given, half salary is given, other salary cuts are bugs cut, etc., etc. So new normalcy, and we ourselves is an example. Now we are talking over these virtual meetings and how to adapt it. Whether there will be a kind of exclusion in the name of digital virtual platform discussions, definitely, because it is not the technology is not accessible. The communication technology, internet technology. It may not be accessible to everyone, and even if one mobile is there, it may not be a smartphone. And even if it is there, whether it will be, who will be given some, say for example, online classes are there, a boy and a girl are there in a family, who the parents to whom they will prefer to give the to one instrument they have. If at all the online classes, maybe different classes in which they will be under different timings, it may be better. Or if it is the same time, then it is a problem. So there will be a disproportionate impact on class, caste and gender in this of this pandemic, and we have to necessarily work everyone. It is not that somebody else will do or only the state will do or the others. It is a responsibility of everyone to work together. devise strategies to work in this new normalcy and also take it forward to disseminate to others. And that is what we are going to do this in these 7 day discussions also. And this proposed implemented, I think there are proposals from the government, and Tamil Nadu government is taking the statistics to invite the access, the students, number of students with access to digital technology. So whether everyone has access to it. So I think that will definitely be going to tell us what is the scenario. And so after that, they may try to implement what kind of strategy. So that proposal is there, but it shouldn't, whatever the digital interactions, it shouldn't end up in exclusion and marginalization. That is the concern. That is the first one. And the other important is the economic shocks. And Nita will be throwing light on that. And of course, in a very macro perspective or global perspective, there is a gross decline in employment, and particularly when it is gender, the question of gender, then whoever is there in a particular factory, the women would be the first to find out. So that there also gender is an important. And of course, how many of them will afford to work from home? Maybe in the higher level officials in the IT sector and such aspects. Maybe if it is self-employed, you can sit at home and do. But home or from home also necessarily be rendering the whole lot of marginalized and vulnerable section out of the envelope. And manufacturing and service sector, and both the, of course, agriculture is there, it is also facing a lot of problems, but the major chunk of employment is coming from manufacturing and service sector, particularly skewed towards the service sector. And given the lockdown, given the immobility and the kind of restrictions, it is really difficult for the people to hire out their labor, and unemployment is the experience people everyone is experiencing. And the other major aspect is the plight of migrant workers. You now would have witnessed both visually and also on reports that how they suffered, how people were walking for miles with children, with pregnant women, and several pregnant women could not get proper facilities, and institutional delivery could not be made, and they had to deliver on the road, and sometimes they lost lives also. So these are all the realities which we witnessed, and this is quite happening in our own time, which we did not face even during the World War I or II. Similarly, it was reported in one of the studies that the kind of expenses and other the cost involved on this pandemic has been quite higher than compared to both the World War I and II. And the plight of rural urban grassroots population is quite dangerous, where again they all belong to the informal sector, and informal sector means no social protection, no social security, and there is uncertainty whether you will be called back for work. And all these migrant workers also, they walk back for 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles, 5,000 miles, and even the transport arranged by the state also were not taking into consideration their need. Like you will be, you are supposed to be get down in one place, but that particular arrangement was absent, and you will be dropped somewhere in the destination, and how to commute to your own native place, whether there is arrangement in that respective state. So these are the issues which were reported, and we also experienced how people, including the student population, suffered in reaching back their home, and having gone there, and the kind of restrictions on transport, how will these migrant workers, particularly in the Tamil Nadu context, I can say in the export processing zone, in the textile sectors, millions of workers, migrant workers are being employed, and they're all back home, and it is difficult to come back. The reverse migration is happening, but there are also silver line that some of them could not withstand and coming back. Even the other day, Somita was pointing this, that the reverse migration is not the permanent, it will be making the people, because you are vulnerable already, there is no income in the native place. Even if this MNRGA captures to a certain extent, it may not be sustaining for a long, and therefore even the harvest season will be over in a few months, and you have to go back and to feed the family, you are supposed to go back to your work. So this is the kind of, so on the supply side and demand side, both the sides, it is a kind of an uncertainty whether the factories will come to normalcy to start their production, whether the orders will continue to come, for example, the export processing zones I was telling, and other sectors also. Only area where the women are also in the forefront is all about the health and sanitation sector, where they are much sought after, and they are under risk also. They are, by taking a risk of their own lives, they are extending their work. And it is in this context the care economy has also become visible, and you are really concerning, I mean, requiring these services from women, because more than 3/4 of the health and sanitation work is being delivered by the women globally, and that is what. And there is also demand for the PPE products, wherein some of the women are engaged, particularly the self-help group, the self-employed and the micro entrepreneurs. They're all engage themselves to produce those products. And the other whole lot of women, the special category women, the transgender, the destitute women, the commercial sex workers, the children, they also are quite, they belong to the marginalized categories, and some support is going, and certain categories, for example, the commercial sex workers, the transgender, they've been engaged in some other work which cannot be done, and now they are all in very much in trouble. And I'm afraid whether any organization which is supporting these categories would be willing to extend support. And economically backward, and those who are not able to access. And in this context, the dropout of girls, see, the schools are closed for a long. There is, of course, in the urban context, it is a different kind of a thing, overburden, and the women are overburdened with dual burden or triple burden, and also associated with domestic violence because of the kind of the uncertainty of employment for men, and immobility, and more income is forthcoming, and these men staying back, and they show their anger and agony to the members of the family, particularly the women, and so they have to bear the brunt of that. So all these economic shocks, the unpaid care work, the global recession will have a multiplier impact on the poor, particularly the vulnerable, and the wages. And I already pointed out that in the forefront, healthcare exposed to the life of risk of their life, and the violence against women also has been on the increase. It was very much reported by the National Commission for Women here, and it is also reported by other institutions and studies globally. So it is not only an Indian phenomenon, it is a universal phenomenon. So we need to look at it, how the economics, the economic vulnerability, and the cultural and social impositions of patriarchal forces, and the capitalist attitude, all put together, playing its role in putting down into subordination the women's issues. And of course, the same is applicable to the other marginalized and vulnerable communities. And food and livelihood security are being, I mean, food security is being attended to certain extent, thanks to government of Tamil Nadu. Here, the Amma canteen has helped to certain extent to the people who are on the roads, the platform, and who got held up, could not go back home. And of course, to certain extent, the PDS distribution. But will it be sufficient? And how the new normalcy be adopted? How long will it be? So the state exchequer will also have a inadequate resource, and it cannot go on and on support, though it has to support. And we have been demanding that at least 5,000 or times 7,500 rupees cash transfer should go to these marginalized communities to ensure the minimum livelihood to be complete. Okay, so this all these coupled with the rigid social and gender norms is really playing its role, and we need to really this is a time to work on changing the rigid social and gender norms, where I already pointed in the beginning itself that it is the role of every individual in the society. It is you are all now home. You learn what is happening 24 hours. Otherwise, or you would have been outside for 8 to 10 hours, and now you are staying back. Most of them now. So though some of them have resumed to work. So you have to tell that, I mean, observe and see how things are happening as a society. Social reproductive activities that is happening, and try to change. And not an exception here also in the pandemic context, where the most of the policies are or the initiatives are being catering to the gender public, and the issues, the specific issues of the women and other marginalized, which I have already listed, are often grossly excluded or ignored. So it is time to understand that, and it is the responsibility of the women's study centers, women's movements, the social movements and social organizations to put forth that is happening already, and so that you can influence the state, the market, and the civil society to be inclusive in their approaches wherever they go. And and the issues which I have just highlighted will definitely be discussed in the 1 week program. And what is actually to be done, it is not just the individual, it is of course, the state and market are working to certain extent, and several factories, they have sent out their labor saying that they don't have the work, and how they will be paid or how they accommodate. And in certain contexts, like in textile sector, we had some programs earlier last week where they communicated saying that half of the workers have already been sent, and the existing workers are being given extra work and exploited, and there is no accountability as to how much they will pay, whether you are taking 12 hours work or 16 hours work, but maybe getting only 8 hours pay. So the different dimensions of the market, which I appeal that both the state and market should empathize on the vulnerable and marginalized communities, to provide the food and livelihood security, decent work, and without any exploitation, and much can be done over with dialogues, consultation with, because it is all functioning separately. See, there are several departments to come together, including the state, market, the civil society, and the organizations. They must come together, and the state must also hold consultations, which very often it is not happening, and they are resisting to have this consultations in the private current context. So that has to be there, and the civil society has its own role, whatever, in whichever capacity it has to deliver. And the social organizations, the youth, the women, the marginalized organizations, Dalit organizations, self-help groups, all will have a say in addressing the whatever way possible, and work out strategies to manage the short and long-term impact. It is not that it is going to be short-lived. It will have implications, particularly the economic shocks will have its implications over the years together, and we have to work together. And it is the responsibility and cooperation of each individual. I am also responsible. Whoever is listening here also are responsible to contribute to certain extent to bring to normalcy and ensure the rights of every individual, particularly the women's rights. So with this, I'll stop, and I'm happy to inaugurate this 7-day short-term program, international webinar series on gender stereotyping, gender bias, and women's rights, which is what it is being given by UGC. And I'm thankful to everyone, and we will definitely be listening to Professor Neeta, who is going to be delivering the key address. She's the key speaker today, and we'll be talking. We will be listening shortly to her. Before that, should Kamalavani be? Can I introduce Professor Neeta now?
Yes, ma'am. You proceed, ma'am, because we'll start directly go to the session now.
Yeah,
You
yeah. Thank
introduce
you. Because the vote of thanks can be had at the last.
at the
Okay.
end of the session, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, welcome, Professor Neeta. You are going to talk now, and I'll take 1 or 2 minutes to just introduce. Professor Neeta is the acting director of Center for Women Development Studies. Neeta is there? Professor Neeta is there?
Yes, yes, I am here.
Okay, okay, okay. I'm wondering. So she is professor, acting director there in the Center for Women Development Studies, one of the prestigious institutions. Is the first institution for women studies here in India, supported by ICSSR, Indian Council for Social Science Research, and it is the center which is really helping us to give the understanding of the women's questions in the society, particularly in the Indian context. And you can just visit their website, what kind of work are going on and what kind of work already being done, which will serve as the base for other centers and forthcoming and the new centers, emerging centers to catch hold of it. And Professor Neeta was with she was the associate fellow and coordinator for Center for Gender and Labor at the V.V. Gri National Labour Institute, Noida, which is also one of the prestigious institutions. She was there during 98 and 2006 and later joined here in the Center for Women Development Studies. Her research interests are labor and employment issues of women, domestic workers, labor migration, and gender statistics and data gaps. This is very important. Being an economist, the kind of data which are required to understand the issues of women and the labor market is very important. So all these areas are definitely, the broad area is labor, but she also works on the informal sector labor, and she keeps writing in many fora, and she also contributed to publications, the many, and only 1 or 2 books I just mentioned, which are very, very important contributions. One on the migration, gender and care economy by Routledge, and working at others' homes, the specifics and challenges of paid domestic worker, Tulika books, and institutional choice in irrigation, a study of distribution of canal command in Kerala, and that was brought out by Concept Publication, and Decent Work, a handbook with Shikumar, and that was again, that was published by V.V. Gri National Institute of Labour, Noida. And she also constantly writes in various journals, and IPW also, you must have read her contributions, and she's the guest editor of the journal, which particularly on special issue on domestic work, economic EPW of the domestic work in the year 2013 October. And she produced several monographs, working papers, and articles, and contributed for chapters in books, which runs to more than 50 and odd. Due to want of time, I'm not reading those publications. She also received some awards, and she was actually the recipient of Ford Foundation Fellowship for a doctoral thesis also. So with this words, a nationally known economist is with us now, and I welcome Neeta, and also invite you to share your thoughts on these rights, employment as women's rights. Professor Neeta, please.
Yeah, thank you all. Let me start by, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah, can I please request all of you to put your mic on mute, because there is a lot of disturbance. Let me start by thanking all, especially the Bharathiar University, Bharathidasan University, the team in both the places, as well as the VCs of these institutions. I think it is important to organize something on this topic today, because I think this is a right time to have such programs. Let me, there was some disturbance, that's why I removed my mic. Let me start by saying that the topic for today's discussion is women's employment as rights. And you all know how women's employment has been seen as one of the central parameters in terms of women's empowerment. There has been a lot of discussions about the need to empower women economically because of its importance in terms of empowering women. Though we have been discussing it as an issue, we actually don't see so many policies that is there in place to help women or to augment women's employment employment in the economy. So I am not going to give a historical theme because I think it is important, even if you are now today's discussion is in the context of COVID. It is important for us to actually look at what has been in terms of women's employment in the past, in terms of giving a historical perspective. Unless we do that, we won't be able to understand and also to move from here as to how do we then have policies in place to actually address the current challenges. So I will take you briefly. I'm not going to give you a detailed analysis or an account of what has happened in the past, but a very brief account of what are the important issues that we need to take into account if we have to think in terms of women's employment in the present context. I have a small PPT presentation which I will put now so that we can follow that presentation. Is it visible?
No, not yet, ma'am.
Oh, it's not visible.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening then.
You have presented? You have to go to the option present, no? Have you done that?
I did. Let me just see.
You can ask someone to help also. You are in the office?
Is it fine?
Ma'am, you
Not
can, yeah,
yeah. It has come.
I think it has, yeah.
It has come, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Please
You can go to full screen, Neeta. Full screen.
you can't share your screen, ma'am.
No, can't you
Full
see?
screen, full screen.
I have shared the full screen. Not coming?
It's coming, but not the full screen. That is why I don't know, but okay, you can manage.
Can manage, but let me just see whether I can do something here. Is it coming?
Come, no problem. It is visible. Yeah, now it is better. Yeah.
Okay, let's go with it because otherwise we may be unnecessarily getting delayed.
Ma'am, actually we have started the session earlier, no worries.
Okay. Is it visible now? No.
It is visible, Neeta. No problem. It is visible.
I think something has happened. Let me just.
Yeah, it has gone now.
Yeah. Some problem. It's never happened. I don't know why today, but let me try once more. Is it visible now? At least minimally?
Yeah. You proceed. It is visible.
Okay. So let me start by saying that women's employment question was actually not one of the priority concerns even in the earlier period, because we look at the discussions. What happened was that after independence, women's questions was actually deemed to have been solved with the adoption of principle of equality in the constitution. and it was assumed that once women are educated and and since we have given right to vote and also encourage women to enter into public services and political offices, there is no need to give special attention or acknowledgement to women's employment question. And this was how it was actually till the 1970s. So we don't actually see any particular policy, the state policy, to address women's employment in this period till 1970s. So in the 1970s, you may all be knowing that a committee was set up to look at the status of women in India, which was from 1971 to 74. And that report, which was actually the landmark report, pointed to the increasing marginalization of women in the economy and society. Invisibility of women's work was one of the issues that was highlighted by this committee because of the issues with counting and how women's work is defined. There are problems of invisibility that the committee has pointed out. But let us leave that for the time being. More than that, the committee also has actually pointed out that women as workers are much lower than that of men, and there has been a consistent decline over time. So from the period of independence, from the decade of independence to 1970s, you actually see a decline in women's work participation rate. And that was one of the issues that the committee had pointed out. The committee actually tried to explain as to why has the participation rates declined. They have actually pointed out that there has been an issue with non-agriculture occupations, and women were actually excluded from the kind of modernization and industrialization that were followed in this period till the 1970s, where there was a focus on large-scale industries, and that actually excluded many women from employment. So the argument that the committee was making was that now women are actually in the periphery of the economy. They were there before independence also, but now they have increasingly been drawn to the periphery. So this was an important issue. But if you look at the literature and if you look at some of the studies that has happened in this period, though the studies have actually come up with detailed analysis of what has happened to women, the policies actually didn't kind of address those issues at all. In the 1970s and also in the 1980s, women were taken as subjects of poverty alleviation programs. So there were targeted programs directed at women to help them to come out, to help families or households to come out of poverty. But these were not seen as employment generating programs. Of course, this was in terms of helping women to generate income in terms of non-agriculture enterprises. It was not seen to actually push women into employment or take women into employment, but as a mechanism to address household poverty issues. So till 1980s, we don't actually see any intervention as far as the state is concerned to address the issues of declining women's work participation rate. Then comes the 1990s, which we call the globalization era since 1990s. So what was the assumption during globalization? Globalization was assumed to actually address the issues of women's low work participation rate. There was an inbuilt assumption of feminization, which was based on the experiences of some of the East Asian countries. And because in many of these countries, with the opening up of the economy, women's work participation rates really increased. So one assumed that with globalization, this is going to happen in our context as well. And again, the assumption was that feminization is going to happen because all this while, what was happening is that because of the strict labor regulations and because of the large focus on the large industries, employment as such was not increasing. And there were all those regulations that industries have to follow. And if we informalize, which was as part of the globalization process, if we informalize industries or sectors, we absorbed automatically. So feminization and informal, let's 1990s. Before that, I would also like to kind of point to this important development in the 1990s, which was actually kind of an extension of what was there in the 1980s. Women were also thought as self-employment, as entrepreneurs, which is basically coming from the self-employment understanding of women's interest, because it is assumed that women will be interested in taking up employment, because self-employment, because that helps women to address the issues of their care work as well as employment. So it was assumed that women will prefer to take up self-employment activities. So women as entrepreneurs was actually an important focus in the 1990s, alongside informalization of sectors or industries where wage employment was the focus. So if you look at this period, what we see is that there has been many organizations for microcredit arrangement. There were also formations of NGO-aided self-help groups. And this was actually, and as I explained earlier, was thought
Excuse
as
me,
a
sorry to interrupt.
catch.
Ma'am, your PPT is gone. Gayatri Sridharan has to go out. You have to go out and come in again now. Sorry.
Sorry?
Ma'am, actually Gayatri Sasidharan is presenting, so you need to go out and come back again. One of the participants has shared their screen.
Ma'am, I think everybody can pin to the screen of Neeta ma'am.
Yes.
So Gayatri Sridharan is presenting, so I can't do it now.
Gayatri Sridharan, please go out and come in, please.
No, ma'am, it might be some mistake or something. I think everybody can manually pin the presentation of Neeta ma'am.
I think if you leave and come back, Gayatri, it will take care, I believe, instead of everyone going and pinning.
Okay, I will do that now. Has it come?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it has come.
So the issue that I was trying to highlight was that this era is also an era of a promotion of self-employment, where women were seen as entrepreneurs, and the connection was that women entrepreneurs and the informal sector, kind of is automatically linked to the globalization globalization phenomena, where they can actually use this possibility to increase their participation in employment. So let me just now show you as to what has happened in this period in terms, if you look at the macro data. I hope the figure is clear. Can you see the figure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So look at the women's work participation rate over the period. What is very clear from this data, one is for rural, the blue line, if you can see, is for rural, and the orange line is for urban areas. So it's very clear that over time, women's work participation rates have declined. In rural areas, the rates have declined from 34% to 19%, which is a huge decline. So we have talked about 1970s, where the committee had actually pointed out of a decline. From there, where we have reached further down to to 19%, which means that out of 100 rural women, only 19 are working, are counted as employed. There are issues of invisibility, there are issues of undercounting, but that doesn't explain this decline. That undercounting and invisibility has been there historically, and which has been somewhat addressed in this period. But I will not say that it is completely addressed, it still remains, but even that cannot explain this decline. The data has become much more authentic over time, and it is much more reliable, and the counting process has been improved over time. So if something has happened, it would have been much better now. But even one doesn't take into account that invisibility issue at all. Even then, what we see is that there's a sharp decline in women's work participation rate from 34% to 19%. And let us take only from 1987, 88. Even then, you have a decline. So there was already a declining kind of a tendency, which has further been activated at different times. And what you can see is that there is sometimes a fluctuation. And what are these periods of fluctuations? When the women's work participation rates are increasing, it is actually periods where rural economy and rural households are going through a very bad phase in terms of economic, their economic status. So women's employment suddenly picks up in these periods when really there is a crisis, but then it declines again. And what we have seen in the since 2009-10, the crisis has been remaining in the rural areas. There has been a lot of crisis. Sorry. Oh.
Nothing. You just go ahead.
Can you see?
Yeah. It is there. No problem.
It's gone from my thing. That's why I was looking at it. Anyway, now so what has happened is that what I'm saying that after 2004-5, the crisis has been there actually in rural areas, which we all know was what we call as rural crisis. That has remained, but we don't see an increase or there is a consistent decline in terms of women's work participation rate in rural areas. And look at urban areas. It has remained almost the same. There has been not much change in terms of women's work participation rate in urban areas. And the discussion has always been that women or households or larger population will actually shift from rural to urban areas looking for employment opportunities, and employment generation has to be there in urban areas where people will get easily absorbed. But look at what has happened in terms of women's work participation rate. It has actually almost been the same, but small decline increase here and there in different periods. So what we see is that within an overall decline, there has been fluctuations in women's employment, but not to say that there has been any improvement over time. So this consistent decline in women's work participation rate is something that we need to actually acknowledge in any discussion on how do we actually now address some of those issues which must have got a different dimension at present and which must have gone worse than what it was earlier. So now let us look at the numbers. How many women have actually been affected by this? We are talking about millions of women. In between 2011-12 and 17-18, if you look at the absolute numbers, in rural areas, some 25 million women have lost work. Whereas men, if you look at men, they have gained. It is not to say that men are taking all women's work, but in the absence of employment opportunities, it is natural that women will be the first to be, to be taken out of the labor market, to be pushed out of the labor market. Because of that, what we see is that in rural areas, there is a sharp decline in the number of women who are employed. And that actually has, when we talk about women's employment as rights and as an empowerment, we actually have to see what is the social impact of such a decline in the number of women who are workers. This is what we are seeing in terms of increased violence, in terms of increased, increased issues that we see at all different social levels, especially violence. So, this is what is in terms of the absolute numbers. Now, let's see as to what is it for all women the same? It's important for us to look at how has this been different for different social groups. Otherwise, we won't be able to actually see the larger implication of this decline, because in our society, the social groups are also an important dimension that has to be taken into account, because that is something which fundamentally affects women's status. So look at the social groups wise status. There has been a decline across all social groups. But this is for rural areas, but the decline has been more for women from the marginalized communities, which means that and we all know women from marginalized communities do not have, or they don't have that kind of an asset. They don't have, so economically they are not well off, most of them, compared to other social groups. And there is a decline, further decline in their economic status, and its implications socially is something which is important for us to look at. So they are already, the marginalized classes and women within that are already has been facing an issue for long. This is for rural areas. Let's look at the urban areas. The decline is not very sharp like what we saw in rural areas. In rural areas, we have seen that for ST women, participation rates have declined from 44% to 27%. For SC, it is from 33, around 32.5% to 17.4%. In urban areas, it is not so much, but here also there is a decline. We will look at it little carefully when we look at the profile of what is happening, where are these women working. And as education, the gap between male and female education has come down, but the gaps between work participation rates of men and women has widened. So one thought education is an answer. It's to improve, to help women to enter labor market. But I think our understanding was very, very narrow, and that is something that we need to relook at. It is not only education that can help women to access employment, but there are many other factors which are equally important, and unless one actually address some of those, we will not be able to kind of address this gap between men and women, and also the decline that we see in terms of women's work participation rates. So we don't see, unlike the kind of in the context of other countries in the Southeast Asia, we actually don't have a situation where we saw any feminization trend in our country at a macro level. So now let's look at the nature of employment, because this is very important for us, because the moment we talk about women's rights and the moment we talk about women's empowerment, it's important for us to understand where are women employed. It's not that all women are getting wages. I think that is an important question for us to look at in terms of women's status. Where are women employed? We can see in the first two columns are about self-employment. And I have categorized them into unpaid workers and paid self-employed. Look at the number of women, proportion, this is not number, the proportion of women who are actually unpaid workers. That means they don't have access to any income. They are financially dependent on someone else, though they are working. For example, women who work in family farms, women who work in in the enterprises or industry,